We can't hope in things of this world. Our hope is in Jesus. And when he walks through our journey with us, that gives us the ability to be successful. That gives us the ability to sustain us when problems come.
I've looked back on my journey and I've wondered where God was.
Everything has changed. Everything has changed since we followed God.
But what I've found is that my God has always been faithful and right on time.
Without God, I can't do it. God has walked through it with us. God has been there with us.
Growing up in church, I'm reminded of an old saying we used to have. When you take one step, God will take two. Sometimes it's that one small step in the right direction.
Woo, woo, woo. How many glad to be in church today? Yeah. I'm so excited. If you don't know me, man, I'm Pastor Eran. I'm one of the pastors here at church, but I travel so much that I'm not here much, and so this is 2 weeks in a row for me, so I'm excited to be here with you for another week, and also it gives the opportunity for us as a church family to give some well-deserved vacation time to our lead pastors, Pastor Dave and Becca. So they're on vacation this week, so you're stuck with me. Sorry. But I'm excited to be with you. And kind of catching me right in the middle of like crazy season, because my wife and I just finished doing 3 weeks of youth camp, preaching 3 weeks of youth camp, and then we're here, and then we got another 3 weeks to go. So if you think about it, you pray for us, because we're spending 6 weeks with lots of teenagers, and just, okay. So look at your neighbor real quick. Look at your neighbor, say, neighbor. Come on, talk to him like you like him. You chose to sit by him. Neighbor, you look good today. Yeah. See, some of you already know what's coming next. Look at your other neighbor. Say, other neighbor. You're my second choice. I just figure if I do that enough here, that at some point, like the married couples will get it right the first time. And so, because if you mess up, and this is not a message on marriage today, right? So you just gotta figure it out. So, how many of you were an athlete growing up? An athlete? Any athletes growing up? All right, cool, bunch of you. How many of you are a parent of an athlete? Yeah, cool. How many of you are a parent who knows nothing about sports, but you still cheered on your kid who was? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Some of you are like, that's me. I don't know what sport I'm watching. All the other parents are yelling at the referee. I guess I should as well. And, it's like, And so, my kids all grew up doing sports. I grew up, my wife grew up, we all played sports. My kids did basketball and soccer. And most recently, my girls decided to do cheerleading, which I say to them all the time is not a real sport, but I'll still support them anyways. And just joking. And, my son, Caleb, he decided this just once, thank God, it was only once, he decided to go out and do track and field once. Do any of you have kids that did track and field? It's a completely different experience, right? I'm going to watch them. I didn't know. I wasn't prepared. I'm thinking like it's a game, like a basketball game or a soccer game, and you go and you show up right before the game starts and you sit and you watch the game and it's done. It's cool. And so I just was like, I said to Caleb, I'm like, when should I show up? It was a Saturday. He's like 8 in the morning. I was like, okay, cool. And so I got there at 8, and I knew, like the moment I showed up, I knew I was in trouble. Because I just came, just like that. I'm thinking, okay, cool. And I'm looking around, and all the other parents, like, they've got like large backpacks and coolers on wheels that they're pulling in, and umbrellas and rain gear and suntan lotion and large bags of food. And I'm just thinking, like, I missed the memo here. I didn't, like, what is going on? And so I said to Caleb, I'm like, when do you run? And he's like, oh, at 3. And I'm like 3 minutes from now? Or he's like, no, it's 3 in the afternoon. I'm like, why am I here like a bazillion hours? But like, I didn't know. I mean, I just was so unprepared. It was actually a quite miserable experience for me. Like, I'll say this, and this will shock some of you. I would rather own a cat than have to go to a track meet like that again. I'm just gonna, sorry. I know, love your cats. Go ahead and love them. It's better than going, and I mean, just all day. And it just, but something in the course of like sitting there all day watching all of the other parents' kids run their race kind of brought me, like, in my mind, brought me back to the end of this series, right? Because we've been, as a church family, we've been in this series called Journey On for quite a while now, several months. And today's the last day, right? And next week we start At the Movies, which we'll talk about that a little bit more at the end of the service. But it just kind of made me think about a couple verses specifically related to our journey and to the race that we're running, right? Look at your neighbor and say, you got a race to run. Yeah. Some of you, as soon as you heard that, you're like, oh, not me. I don't run anymore. I'm done. You know, I run to the refrigerator and to the remote control. That's it. That's you know. But you got a race to run. And let me draw your attention. I'm going to draw your attention to a couple passages of scriptures, but just we'll pick up where we left off last week. If you were with us last week, if you weren't, it's okay. I'll catch you up to speed real quick. Last week, we talked about the Apostle Paul, and we talked about how he specifically wanted to go to Rome. He wanted to go to the city of Rome because it was the most powerful city in the world at that time, and that he felt like that was a part of his race or his journey, so to speak. And so he allowed himself to be taken prisoner. He allowed himself he intentionally went to Jerusalem knowing it was going to be problematic, and this is what he says about it, right? So I'm picking up from where we left off last week in Acts chapter 20. These three verses, 22, 23, 24, this is the Apostle Paul speaking. Here's what he says. And now, compelled by the Spirit, I'm going to Jerusalem, not knowing what will happen to me there. I only know that in every city the Holy Spirit warns me that prison and hardships are facing me. How would you like to have that race? Right? Everywhere I go, I just know God tells me everywhere I go I'm going to get myself into trouble. Right? Some of you are like, well, my race is kind of like that. I don't, you know. But he says, hardships are facing me, and then he finishes this way. However, I consider my life worth nothing to me. That's hard. My only aim is to finish the race. Everyone say, finish the race. And complete the task the Lord Jesus has given me, the task of testifying to the good news of God's grace. Let me paraphrase this for you, because it kind of smacks right in the face of what we hear in our culture here in America a lot. Because in this day and age, what we often hear, especially if you're a young adult and you're single and you're trying to kind of figure out life and what some of your next steps are, what we often hear is a phrase that sounds like this: it's my life to live. It's my life to live. I'll do whatever I want to do, however I want to do it, whenever I want to do it, with whoever I want it to be. You know, it's my life to live. It's my life to live. But Paul here is saying something that's completely the opposite. Completely, he's not saying it's my life to live. He's saying it's not my life to live. It's my life to give. Right? And Paul's saying, I have a race. Everyone say, I have a race. And Paul's saying part of my race is giving of myself in such a way, giving of my life in such a way, so that I can fulfill the race. I want to be able to finish life and say, I've run the race. Now, when I read that verse, it automatically triggers another really, really popular couple of verses in the book of Hebrews. And there's a lot of Bible scholars that believe that Paul also wrote the book of Hebrews, even though it's not a definitive yes. There's a lot that would lean that direction and say, yeah, I think it was probably the Apostle Paul. And so in Hebrews chapter 12, verses 1 and 2 and 3, it says this. It says, therefore, since we're surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles, and let us run with perseverance the race. Everyone say, run the race. Look at your neighbor and say, run your race. Yeah. Run the race marked out for us, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of our faith, who for the joy set before him endured the cross, scorning its shame, and sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. Consider him who endured such opposition from sinners, so that you will not grow weary and lose heart. It's easy to grow weary, isn't it? It's easy to lose heart. You're out there running your race, or you're trying to find your race, or figure out what your race is. And here, the writer of Hebrews, or I'll just stand by my stance that is probably Paul. Paul is saying, hey, listen, it's easy to lose heart. You've got a race to run, though, and your race is important. Now, the world would say to us, hey, just go run your race. It's just you. You do your thing. You know, it doesn't matter to you. You do whatever you want to do. Your race doesn't really impact anyone else's race. But that's not what the writer of Hebrews is saying here. He's saying that there's a great cloud of witnesses surrounding us, and that we're running our race in such a way that me running my race impacts not only others that are running their race around me, but it also impacts those that are coming behind me. It's almost the image of the relay race. You know the relay race where they hand the baton, right? I watched it that day, that terrible day where I was actually going online looking at cats to figure out which one I was going to buy, right? I never did that, I promise. But they're doing the relay race, and you got the 4x4, the 4x1, whatever they call that, right? And one runner's coming into what they call the exchange zone, right? And he or she is handing the baton to the next runner who's starting to get their speed up, and they're reaching behind to pick it up, right? I don't really like going to track and field, but somehow, some way, I have become an Olympic junkie. Any of you are like, it's like the Olympics come on, and I'm like, I will take off 2 weeks of work if I could, right? And just sit there and just nonstop watch it. And so, if you know anything about Olympic history, you know that the U.S. women's team is typically always ranked at the top. They're always favored to win. In the year 2000, I'll give you a quick history lesson, right? In the year 2000, at that point in history, there had been 16 Olympic Games, right? And our women's team had won gold medal in the relay 9 out of the 16 times. So, that's pretty significant, right? And but in the year 2000, the Olympics are held in Sydney, Australia. And so on paper, they're favored to win, right? And it's almost like everyone's just kind of sitting back like, well, we'll just watch, America run away with the gold again, and here they are. But I don't know exactly what happened, all the details, and what was happening maybe in their thinking. Maybe they were a little too confident, overconfident. Maybe they were a little arrogant, a little cocky or something. But they got a little sloppy in one of the exchange zones when one of the runners was handing the baton to the next runner, and as a result, the runner that she was handing to had to slow down to stay inside of the zone to receive the baton, and in the process, they slowed down so much that the Jamaican team and the Bahama team flew right past them, and we couldn't catch up. We ended up going from the favorites to win the gold all the way to the bronze. Well, 4 years later, now the Olympics are in Athens, Greece at this point. And again, we're favored to win. Number one, all the stats basically give us, we're going to win. We're going to redeem ourselves from the bronze medal the year before. And if you go back and watch on YouTube, you rewatch it, in this part of the race when they're making the exchange. Now, you got to understand, the exchange zone is 20 meters in length. And that exchange of the baton happens so quickly that typically if you exchange it well, it happens in 1.9 seconds or less. That's how quickly it takes place. Well, one of our runners, Marion Jones, her name was, she's running in, and you can actually see her in a replays of the video mouthing to, I think it was Lauren Williams who she was handing it to, saying, I'm not going to make it. I'm too tired. I'm not going to make it. And so she's slowing down, but Lauren Williams is speeding up as she's trying to receive it, and she steps outside of the exchange zone before she received the baton, automatic disqualification. So now we've gone from we're supposed to win to we got nothing at all. 4 years later, it's 2008, we're in China now, and we have to redeem ourselves. Things go from bad to worse because in 2008, one of our runners dropped the baton in the exchange zone, automatic disqualification. And it takes until 2012 in London where they finally get back on top again. Now to me, that race, or the words of Paul in Acts 20, or the words of the writer of Hebrews in Hebrews 12, it's this image of you and I have a race to run, and it's almost like a generational, eternal relay race. Where my race matters, because my race, I have to be committed to my journey. We've been talking for weeks now about journey on. I have to be committed to my journey because my journey matters to the next generation that I'm going to pass the baton to. It matters. Look at your neighbor and say, your race matters. I'm not talking about your ethnicity now. That matters too, right? But I'm talking about your spiritual race, where my race matters. It makes a difference. The way that I live my life has impact on the life of other people. Think of it this way. You and I are only ever one generation away from the extinction of Christianity. All it takes is one generation to basically say, you know what, it doesn't matter. It's just my race. If I want to drop the baton, I'll drop the baton. If I don't want to pick it up and run, I don't pick it up and run. It doesn't matter how slow. It doesn't matter if I'm sloppy or cocky or arrogant. No, it does. It only takes one generation to drop the baton of faith, to drop the baton of Christianity, and the next generation coming to receive it has nothing to hold on to. Your journey matters. The way you live your life matters, not just for you in this day and age, but also for the generation coming behind you. Right? Let me prove it to you real quick. If you go all the way back to the Old Testament, It's probably what I would say is probably one of the saddest passages of Scripture. It's found in the book of Judges, Judges chapter 2. Let me read a couple verses to you. They're going to go on the screen. You can read along with me. It says this. It says, the people served the Lord throughout the lifetime of Joshua. He was the great general that had come after Moses. Moses had passed away at this time. Moses had passed the baton of faith on to Joshua, right? Joshua is leading the country now. So the people served the Lord throughout the lifetime of Joshua and of the elders that outlived Joshua, who had seen all the great things the Lord had done for Israel. So this is the generation that vividly remembers, because they had personally experienced it, they vividly remembered the parting of the Red Sea. They remembered the 10 plagues that came down on Egypt. They remembered the parting of the Jordan River. They remembered the walls of Jericho coming down. They remembered God moving on their behalf for their generation. This is the generation. Now, here's what happens, though. Joshua, son of Nun, the servant of the Lord, died at the age of 110, and they buried him in the land of his inheritance in the hill country of Ephraim, north of Mount Gash. Verse 10, saddest verse in the Bible. After that, a whole generation had been gathered to their ancestors. Another generation grew up who knew neither the Lord nor what he had done for Israel. What was the end result? The Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord. They served the Baals. Those were false gods in that day and age. They forsook the Lord, the God of their ancestors who had brought them out of Egypt. They followed and worshipped various gods and other people's gods around them. How does that happen? Like how does one generation see the manifest acts of God on their behalf? Red Sea parting, walking through on dry ground, defeating giants and watching walls of... how does that happen? How does one generation experience so much of the glory and grandeur of God moving on the behalf, only to in turn drop the baton in passing their faith onto the next generation? Unfortunately, I see this trend. I see it a lot in our churches today. I travel all over the country, been with a couple thousand teenagers just in the last 3 weeks, and I see oftentimes a younger generation that feels like they're reaching out to receive something, yet there's nothing there for them. Why does that happen? Because somewhere in the process, my generation, your generation, those of us that are adults and parents, somewhere in the process, we've gotten a little too comfortable or a little too lazy or a little too cocky, or we've just bought into the lie that the devil's been trying to sow that our race doesn't really matter. Or you're living a half-truth. You're thinking that what God is doing for you is only for you, instead of it being not just for you, but also what he's doing through you to the next generation. God's seeing past, present, and future all in one time. And sometimes when you and I pray prayers and we ask God to help us, he is helping us. And he's doing stuff for us, but he's also intending to do something through you and through the race that you're going to run. That's what the writer of Hebrews is trying to get across. Now, before we go back to Hebrews 12, and I'm going to break it down for you and make it real memorable for you in Hebrews 12, 1 and 2. But before we get there, you got to understand a little bit of the broader context of the book of Hebrews. Because the writer of Hebrews is very concerned that they're getting ready to drop the baton. And we know this because I'll pull a couple verses out and you'll see this, right? Look at this verse right here. Hebrews chapter 2, verse 3. I'm going to give you 3 other verses that are all going to go on the screen together. It says, some of you have neglected so great a salvation. So he's speaking to a group of people who have forgotten the great price that was paid for their salvation. That's where it starts. It says, I forgot how much Jesus had to pay for my salvation or your salvation. Then he goes on, he says this in Hebrews 5:12. He says, some of you ought to be teachers by now, but you still need someone to teach you. Right? Now that's just a flat out rebuke. He's just saying, listen, you need to grow up. You should be a lot further along than what you are. You think I'm talking to your neighbor right now. I'm talking to you. Right? Right? He's just saying, like, you should already be actively passing the baton of faith to the next generation, to your kids or to other kids or to the next generation or to those that are younger in the Lord, than you are. Yet you're sitting back saying, I need more. I just need to go. He's saying, no, it's time for you to grow up. It's time for you to pass. And then he goes on and he says this in verse number 10, verses 22 and 23. He says, earlier you endured a hard struggle. Now, we don't know exactly what that struggle was, but here I see the writer of Hebrews, he's being real empathetic at this point. He's saying, listen, I get it. Life has been hard on you. How many of you would be like, yeah, it's kind of hard. the race has been hard. It hasn't always been easy. Yeah, and so he's saying, I understand. Like, it's been hard. It's been difficult. Like your race, you and I, we all have parts of our race that if we could go back and erase, we would, right? right? There are laps that we've run that we wish we didn't have to run that lap, right? There are laps that you're still running that you're like, can I get across the finish line? I'm getting a little winded here, right? But that is a part of human nature. Everybody has some parts of their race that are like, man, that wasn't easy. But here the writer's saying, I get it, I understand it, but here's where you should be. And then almost in a total reversal, when we get to chapter 11, and I'm not going to read all of it to you, but you can go back and read it yourself. Chapter 11 is what you and I would refer to in the church. We would refer to it as like the hall of faith, right? Not like the hall of fame, but like the hall of faith. It's like all the heroes of the faith that have done incredible things. And so here the writer is saying, hey, listen, you're neglecting a great salvation. You should already be teachers. I know it's been hard, so it's kind of rebuke, I care for you. And then he almost does like this reverse psychology thing in chapter 11. He's like, let me try to encourage you by retelling you some of the stories of those who have gone on before you to encourage you to not drop the baton and run your race in a committed and faithful way. Then we get all the way back to Hebrews chapter 12, verses 1 and 2, and he says this. In verse 1, he says, therefore. Anytime you see a therefore in the Bible, you have to ask yourself the question, what's it there for? Right, and so he's referring to chapter 11, and he's saying, because all of these great heroes of the faith did this, and Noah did this, and David did this, and Jacob did this, and Esther did this, and Mary did this, and Abraham did this, and Sarah did this. Therefore, he says this, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses. Now here's step number one. If you're going to journey on, and you're going to be committed, you're going to take this whole sermon series and walk out of here and say, I've got a race to run. Everyone say, I got a race to run. Here's the first tip that the writer of Hebrews has given you in verse 1. It's just 2 words. I got 4 points for you. All of them are 2 words. They're going to be easy to remember, easy for you to write down. Everyone say, look back. Look at your neighbor and say, look back. Turn around behind you to the person who's behind you and say, look back. That's right. You just talked at the back of someone's head. How did that feel? I didn't even realize that was going to happen until he did. Okay. But he's saying this. He's saying sometimes you need to look back. And you just need to remind yourself or be reminded that as difficult as your race is, there are others who have had it more difficult and they were successful in their race. That's what he's saying. Say, look back. Find a little bit of encouragement by some of the family members of our faith that have done some pretty crazy things. I mean, when you read through Hebrews 11, it's a reference to other stories in the Bible. There's some crazy stuff those people did. Like Noah, for instance. Noah, like God tells Noah, build an ark. And this is just how my imagination goes. I just think, like God tells Noah to build an ark. He's like, okay, cool, I'll build an ark. And so he wakes his sons up. He's like, hey guys, we're going to build an ark. 3 boys. What's an ark? It's like a boat. What are we building a boat for? They start building the boat. They have no idea what they're doing. For 100 years, they're building a boat. You think your journey's long? You can't even make it through a church service that's 100 minutes, right? It's like 100 years, right? They're building, right? People come walking along. Hey, Noah, what you building? A boat. What's a boat? I don't know. I think it floats on water. What do you need it for? Why is it so big? We're going to put animals in it. What? Why are you going to do that? It's going to rain. There's going to be a flood. What's a flood? I'm not sure. God said it's going to happen. That's crazy. I mean, they're all throughout the Bible. People do crazy. Abraham and Sarah. Sarah's 90 years old. They find her shopping in the maternity section at Walmart one day. They're like, Grammy, what are you doing, Grammy? She said, you buying some, clothes for like your granddaughter? No, it's for me, baby. Grammy needs to sleep more at night. Grammy, it's just story after story. David, what are you doing, David? I'm going to go fight against that 9-foot giant with 5 stones in my pocket. This makes no sense. Daniel in the lion's den praying that the lions are on the Daniel fast. I mean, that's just crazy. It's just nuts. But that's not, we've got some crazy members in our spiritual family, right? How many of you are like, spiritual family? I got some crazy members in my actual family. I got some, yeah. Some of you are like, they're sitting right there. Like they're just. Here's my advice to you. So when you get discouraged and you start to lose heart and you start to feel like I can't make it, when you look back, you're going to see in the Bible in particular some crazy stories of people whose lives have been so much harder and have been asked to do things that were completely nonsensical. Their race didn't make sense to them, which is where some of you are at. You're like, if I just understood better what God was asking me to do, then I'd be more faithful. No, you wouldn't. You'd be more faithful if you actually obeyed, even in spite of the fact that you don't fully understand where your race is taking you. That's what he's saying here. So just embrace the crazy. I mean, when it comes to your spiritual faith and your journey and committing, just embrace the crazy. You believe all the crazy stuff. You realize that, right? You believe that Jesus was born of a virgin, right? That's crazy. You believe that he was God and he lived here in this world. That's crazy. You believe that he died and rose again 3 days later. That's crazy. But just go ahead and look back and embrace it all and say, yeah, I believe all the crazy stuff. And the race that I'm running right now might be crazy too, but I'm going to be faithful to it because God told me to be faithful to it. That's what he's saying. Then he goes on. Right? And then in the rest of verse 1, he says this, let us throw off everything that hinders and sin that so easily entangles. So the first thing we do is we look back. And the second thing we do is we look in. Everyone say, look in. See, here's where we look in and we say the writer says, throw off everything that so easily entangles, right? And the sin that gets in. Let me make sure I'm saying it right. Let me go back to it. Throw off everything that hinders and sin that so easily entangles. Right? So there's two things that are going to mess you up. They're going to trip you up in your race. One is things that will hinder you, and the other is sin that will entangle you. Now, I think we're all pretty well aware, like if there's sin in my life, that's going to mess with me. Like that's going to mess with my race. That just is. I'm not going to be as successful, or I'm not going to really be able to journey on and be committed to my journey if there's a lot of sin that's happening in my life. And so the writer's addressing that. He's saying, hey, you've got some sin. You need to deal with it, right? We probably don't talk enough about sin in the church world anymore. Let me paint you like this, right? If I went to the doctor and he diagnosed me and he looked at the report and the report said that I had like a terminal illness, but he decided that he didn't really want to like put that kind of weight or pressure on me. And so instead of telling me, Eran, you're dying, he just said, Eran, you probably just need to go home. You got the flu. You just need to go home and get a drink of water and just kind of rest and take a couple naps, right? What would we call that? We'd call that medical malpractice, right? And we put that doctor out of business. Why? Because he wasn't honest about what was happening in my body. Why is it that in churches across our country, we expect pastors to commit spiritual malpractice on a regular basis and not deal with the fact that it is the sin in your life that's causing you to not be able to run the race that God's called you to run? The writer deals with that. But then he goes even deeper. Because he says it's not just the sin that will entangle you, it's also things that will hinder you. He doesn't even say whether the things that will hinder us are good or bad. He just says throw off everything that hinders. He's basically saying you probably need to lose some weight. Look at your neighbor and say, you need to, no, don't do that. I'm sorry. Right? But he's saying you need to lose some weight. He's saying there's some things that have weighed you down. There's some burdens you're carrying that you probably don't need to carry. Right? Years ago, when my dad and I were training to climb Kilimanjaro, we were raising some money for missions and water wells and stuff like that, and the guides would tell us, we had these conference calls where they were training us, and one of the things the guides would say to us over and over and over again is, you need to be really careful about how much weight you carry. And they weren't talking about like your waistline, that was a part of it, but they were talking about the weight in your backpack, because the temptation is to feel like I need to try to carry everything with me, and you carry too much weight, and it weighs you down and makes you less effective in your race, or in this case, in the climb. And then when we were on the climb, they had this phrase, the guys, they'd all say this over and over again, they would say, there's no such thing as bad weather on the mountain, just bad gear. And I didn't really understand it. I'm like, what do you mean it's just bad weather? It just rained, it's cold, there's a blizzard, I mean, we're from the Poconos, we understand bad weather, right? Like, we get it. But what the guides were trying to communicate to us is this, that it's easy for us on a climb to blame the weather for our lack of preparation for the environment that we're in. It's parallel to what the writer here is saying. It's easy for you to allow yourself to get entangled with things that aren't necessarily bad things, but they weigh you down and they make you less effective in your race or your journey. This is actually a profound moment of spiritual growth for you when you understand what this verse is really saying. Because what the writer here is saying is this, it's not just sin that will cause your journey to be ineffective. It's all the good things that you've allowed in your life that distract you from actually doing what God's called you to do. See, some of us, we live our whole life at the level of when it comes to spiritual decisions that we're making, we live our whole life at this level. It's a very shallow, superficial level. I'm coming at you hard with it. But we live our whole life at this level. Is it wrong? Oh, it's not wrong, then I'll do it. Then I'll add it into my life. That's very shallow. This writer is getting to a profound moment of spiritual growth for you and I, because he's encouraging you, ask yourself the question, not is it wrong, but ask yourself the question, is it weighing me down? Is it making me less effective in the race that I'm called to run. If it's not going to make me more effective, then I don't want it. If it's not going to help me run faster, then I want to get rid of it. It's not going to help me actually finish the race that God's marked out for me, then just say no to it, even if it's not sinful. I want my life to count. It's not my life to live, it's my life to give. That's what he's saying here, right? One of my mentors used to always say to me when I was a young man, he used to always say to me, Aaron, if you want to be a man of God, you need to narrow your interest. And it took me a long time to figure out what he really meant. But this is what he was saying. He was saying that, listen, there's a lot of good things you can do in life. There's a lot of great hobbies and activities that you can take on. There's a lot of great causes out there that you can jump on board with. But some of those good things will weigh you down to the point where you're not really effectively pursuing the race that God's called you to. You need to learn how to be ruthless with yourself and be able to say no to some things in your life just because you know, even if they're a good thing or not sinful, they might stand in the way of the best thing that God has for you. Let me make sure it makes sense to you real quick. When I was in college, I was a senior in college. And Julie and I had been dating for like maybe 5 or 6 months at this point. I was so confused. We're like a couple months from graduation. I'm like, I don't know what I want to do. I don't know who I'm supposed to be. I don't know if this girl's supposed to be in my life or not. We're going back and forth and back. I'm going back and forth in my head, blah, 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 blah. And so I made what was like the worst decision I could have ever made. I decided that I needed to break up with this wonderful woman who's sitting over here on the front row. I needed to break up with her. And I couldn't think of a good way to do it, so I just decided to play the God trump card, and I said, God told me to do it. Yeah, go ahead. You can laugh. It's totally fine. It's totally embarrassing. Just as, you know. And so, but I didn't just say it like that. I did it in like preacher form, like an hour of like walking her through all this stuff. And she's so kind. She's nice. She's just kind of sitting there nodding. She's nodding the whole time. Everything. Now here's how you know if a person is really focused on their race, because this was her response to me. She said to me when I got all done talking, she said to me, she's like, that's cool. You better figure it out, because I know that God has a calling on my life, and I ain't going to wait around for you. Plus, there's a lot of guys on this campus that would love to marry me, so I'll just go find someone else. I love you. I'm so sorry. Thanks for still choosing me, right? But I mean, like, but there's someone who says, I know my calling. I know what I'm supposed to do. All right, here we go. Let's move on real quick. He goes on in the rest of verse 1. He says this: let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us. Number 3, everyone say this: look down. So first we look back, we get inspired, then we look in, we lose some weight and get untangled for some stuff. Then we look down and we say there's a race, and the text says, the writer of Hebrews says, a race is marked out for us. So I want you to see yourself there. You're in the stadium. You know, you're on the racetrack. There's the lines there, and man, you're in your lane. Like this is the lane that God has marked out for me. Like, here I go, right? This is my lane. Now here's the challenge that most of us deal with. Is that while I'm running my race in my lane, I'm checking out what all the other runners are doing in their lane. And sometimes I like their race a little bit better than mine. And I wish my race was their race. And I start to get real unsatisfied, and I start to get real discontent. And I'm just like, I don't like my race. My race is boring. My race is weird. My race is, I like that person's race. It was really, and we see this in church all the time. But I want to be a singer. I want to be on stage. I want to sing. Yeah, but you can't sing. So why are you trying to run that race, right? Like, better go be an usher then or something. But if you can't usher, then you better go do something else, right? Like, better go do kids' community church or something. Like find a race that's marked out for you. See, here's the challenge. It's really, really hard for you to be effective running your race when you're too busy scrolling through everyone else's race and trying to figure out what everyone else is doing. But that's what we do. Now, God has given you a race. Look at your neighbor and say, you got a race. Again, I'm not talking about your ethnicity right now, right? We know that. We understand it. I'm talking about the race that God has marked out for you, and your race matters if you don't run it. You see, here's the real key, though. You can get distracted by everyone else's race. You can get all messed up. You can get race envy because you really wish you were running their race. You can get all that kind of stuff, right? And you feel deflated in your own race, and you feel like you don't even have the power for you to run your race. You know why you feel that way? Because God can only empower you to run the race that he's marked out for you. Let me say it like this. There's grace for your race. There's not grace for you to run someone else's race. And so if you stay in your lane, look at your neighbor and say, stay in your lane. Right? If you stay in your lane, When you stay in your lane, then what happens is the Holy Spirit empowers you to finish and complete and run well the race marked out for you, the journey that you're supposed to commit to. Some of you are so frustrated right now because you're trying to produce something with your race in your life that God never planned in you to begin with. And so you live in a place of ultimate frustration because you don't like your race. And God says, no, I've marked out a race for you. You got to look down. You got to say, this is my race. This is my race. This is what he's called me to. Now, here's the last one right here. In verse 2, the first couple words of verse 2, he says this. He says, look to Jesus, the author and perfecter of your faith. So first we look back and we find some encouragement. And then we look in and we figure out how we're going to lose some weight so we can be most effective in running our race. And then we look down and we figure out this is exactly my race, what God has called me to. I'm going to stay in this lane. And then we look up. Everyone say, look up. We focus and fix our eyes on Jesus, who according to verse 2 says he's the author and perfecter of my faith. I love the way the writer describes him here, because the writer's basically saying this. He's saying, you serve a God who's actively and presently authoring and perfecting your faith and your race. You don't understand every step you're taking. Some parts of it are nonsensical. Sometimes you take step after step after step and you don't see the result that you thought that you were going to see. But here's what you need to know. When you look up and you fix your eyes on Jesus, you serve a God who's actively still involved. He's still presently and actively authoring your faith. That means he's still marking out the lines for you to run in. He's still establishing your race, right? It's an ongoing process. I don't know about you. I'm really thankful that I serve a God who did a whole lot more. Although it would have been enough, he did a whole lot more than just send Jesus to die on a cross and raise from the dead. He's still actively involved in authoring and perfecting my faith as I run my race. And the moment you put all this together and you're like, okay, I'm going to look back. I got to commit. I'm journeying on. I got to commit. I'm looking back and I'm finding some encouragement and I'm looking in and I'm getting rid of some stuff so I can run effective. And I'm looking down and I'm laying out, this is it. This is what God wants me to do. And then I'm looking up and I'm seeing him. When you finally get to all of these things, you put them all together, you're going to have this moment in your life. Maybe you're there right now. You're going to have this moment in your life where you're like, I don't know if I can do this. Anybody with me? I don't know if I can run this race. I don't know. I don't know if I'm going to be able to finish this. And the moment that you look to the author and perfecter of your faith and you simply confess that to him and say, Jesus, I can't do this on my own. You know what his response is to you? His response is, I know. That's why I'm still authoring and perfecting your faith. That's why I'm still writing it. And now that you know what I've always known, that you could never really run your race all by yourself anyways, now that you finally come to the point where you say, I know what my race is, but God, I need you to strengthen me and empower me for my race. Now that you finally know what I've always known, now I'll do for you what you never could have done for yourself. I'll empower you and strengthen you. I'll be the source that you need so that you can finish and complete your race. Too many of us are trying to run our race with all the resources that we have available in our life. And God says, you don't need all the resources when you have the source living inside of you. Here's what I want you to do. Take a couple minutes. I want you to watch this video. I want you to see the story of Pastor Deidre, one of our staff members here, and see her story about journeying on and see her story about committing to the journey that God had laid out for her. Let this encourage and inspire you here as we bring our service a little bit closer to the end here. Guys, go ahead and roll that video for us.
I came from Far Rockaway, Queens in New York. I grew up there my entire life and got married to the boy that I met in high school. And we had some babies and decided to just make a different life, to make a change for our family. And the Poconos was it. My realtor, we were going around and he was showing us the different schools at the time. He let us know that a church met here. At first, I was like, wow, this is different. I felt at home. I felt like the people were very friendly. They greeted us and greeted our entire family. And so it made me feel okay. And so I said, okay, we'll try it out. One of the things that I made sure I got into is community groups. That's the first thing I heard about. I didn't know what community groups were. But Kalia and I joined a Mommy and Me community group. And from that point on, that's something that has been a part of my life that has helped grow me and shape me and just helped me to be who I am. My husband at the time had had a kidney transplant, and it was just really a hard time. For me, I felt like, I don't know if I can do this. I just don't know if I can do this. And it's several times I said, God, why me? Why did you give this to me? Why did you give me this to bear? And so I would cry going to the hospital. I would cry coming home from the hospital. I would go in the bathroom. The kids just thought I was taking a shower, and I was literally crying. I'm in his room, and next thing I know, I see a sea of people that I didn't know. At my home, food was just showing up. My mother was there and saying, do they think he died? Because normally when things like this happen, you only come because it must be the repast. But then those knocks came at the door, the texts came through, the phone calls came. We got you. What do you need for us to do? We're right here. And they were. Had I not had the people here, had I not had a church family, had I not had anything to pull on, I don't know where that would have took our family. So my favorite scripture is Jeremiah 29:11. And I felt like if this was happening, this was part of God's plan. I didn't know why. I didn't know why all this was happening. But it was a part of his plan. Michael had gotten better, but then years, maybe 5 or 6 years later, Michael and I went through a really tough transition in our marriage. We got divorced. And I think because I went through that early on situation, and God allowed me to see that there were people in my life that was going to be here for me. When that divorce came, it made it a little bit easy to go through. Me and the kids have found a home here. We've made a life here, and we have family here. And so I had all the support that I needed right here at my church. Now I am that divorced woman, that single mom, someone who has gone through a divorce and has walked through it. And so when I get an opportunity to talk to other people who are going through it, and they get bitter and they're angry, and I'm telling them, nope, it doesn't have to be that way. If you really give it over to God, he will help you get through it. And sometimes you can't see it at first because you're mad. This is what I said, this is not the life I signed up for. But God knew the life that he was giving me. And so with that, I held onto his hand. And so I tell people now, I tell that single mom, you got this. I know you're going through the hormones and all of this, but you got this. She's gonna be okay. You know, I have a heart for families now. So it's not even just the kids, just the family unit as a whole. The mom, the single dad, and to just let them know that the kids can still be okay. A lot of times we think, how are the kids going to manage? Are they going to be okay? Are they going to fall by the wayside? I'm going to tell you, I have 4 great people walking around on this earth who still love the Lord in spite of everything that mom and dad has gone through, in spite of the hard times and what it looks like. And so now I just see families, and I'm like, okay, how can we take fragments and put them back together and make them whole? Because that's what God did for my family. I really believe we become what we're committed to. What you set your mind to is who you will be. And I was committed to live this life and to walk this journey with the Lord. And so that's who I am. I've had the unique opportunity to not only just be a church member or just a member on staff, but I've had the opportunity to work right closely with the lead pastors here, just to be right hand to Pastor Dave and Becca. And I'm going to tell you something, when you can see their heart and what breaks them, you're committed to that because you can see that they're committed to that. We've been through a lot of hard times, and at any given time, Pastor Dave could have walked out the side door and I would have opened it up for him, but he didn't quit. He didn't stop. He continued to pray. He continued to seek God, and you now have an opportunity to see what all the tears were for, what all the praying was for, what all the fasting was for, what broke his heart, grew his heart. And here we are as a church. I'm excited to continue on this journey of what God has taken me just personally and my family. But not only that, I'm excited about where God has taken Community Church. I don't know what the future holds. I really, truly don't. But I would say just continue to take that next step after the next step and after the next step, and know that God is with you and he's guiding you.
Amen. So good. So good. You got a race to run, don't you? And some of you are still discovering that race. Some of you are right in it. And some of you have been in it long enough that you've been tempted to quit that race, haven't you? Don't quit. Don't quit. Don't quit. It's a temptation that every athlete has felt to quit. It's a temptation that every king has felt it. Every president has felt it. Every soldier in a battle has felt it. Every parent has felt it at some point. Every entrepreneur has felt that temptation to quit. Don't quit. Don't you quit. Don't quit. Your race is too important. Your race is too important for you to quit. And I know you might not be as gifted as the next runner, or you might not be as talented as someone else. You might not have all the same opportunities that other people have had. But however you have to do it, just keep on running your race. If you're running it, if you're jogging it, if you're sprinting it, if you're walking it, if you're limping along, just keep on moving. If you got to do it in a walker or with a cane or crutches or a wheelchair, just keep on moving. Your race matters. You might not set a course record. You might not get a gold medal with a ribbon. You might not hoist a trophy. But when it's all said and done, what matters is that you finish the race. So do what the Apostle Paul said. He said, I have fought the good fight. I have run my race. I have kept the faith. Keep the faith. Keep the faith when you feel like you're doing it all by yourself. Just keep the faith. When you feel like no one's with you, keep the faith. When you feel like your family has abandoned you, keep the faith. When you've run out of all your money, keep the faith. If you've lost everything, keep the faith. If you've lost your friends, keep the faith. If you've lost a spouse, keep the faith. If you've lost a child, keep the faith. If you're bankrupt and broken, busted, keep the faith. If you got to move back in your mama's basement, just keep the faith. Keep on running the race. Because when you step across that finish line, you enter into the cloud of witnesses. You become a part of the hall of faith. You become a part of the story of the testimony of those that have gone on before us. And if they went on before us, then you and I can do it as well. How do I know? Because Noah did build an ark and saved all mankind. David did defeat the giant and win the battle for Israel. Mary did give birth to Jesus, who died on the cross and rose again from the grave. And my Bible says the same Spirit that raised Jesus from the grave lives inside of every one of us. So you got to keep the faith and keep on running your race. Would you stand to your feet all across this place? Would you stand to your feet? You're here in this house right now. Maybe you're watching online. You're here in this house and you say, Pastor Eran, would you pray for me? Because I'm in a season of my race right now. I'm in a lap of this race where I feel like giving up. And I need someone to pray for me that I'll be faithful and I'll stay committed to this journey that I'm on. You say, that's me, you're talking to me. Would you just raise your hand wherever you're at? Raise your hand, raise your hand, raise your hand, raise your hand. All right, now everybody that has a hand raised, keep it raised for just a moment. Those of you that don't have hands raised, would you just turn right now and maybe pray with somebody? Maybe it's a husband and wife that need to pray together. Maybe there's someone around you to your left or your right, or someone in front of you. Come on, as a family now, we're going to support one another. Let's turn and let's just pray with one another. You've got your hand up. Maybe you turn and pray with somebody right now. But I'm going to pray for you as well. But all across this place, I want to see little groups of 2 and 3, just kind of gather together, just saying, I'm praying. We're going to pray for you. I'm going to pray for you. You guys just turn and pray for one another right here, right now in this moment. Maybe if you're home watching with someone else at home, just turn and pray for one another just for a moment, just for a moment, just for a moment. And we're just going to pray. We're going to pray. Maybe grab someone's hand. Maybe put a hand on someone's shoulder right now and just take a moment and pray for one another. We're just going to believe in faith that God's going to empower us for this race that He has for us. Lord Jesus, I pray in your name. I pray, God, that you strengthen those who are feeling so weak and tired right now. Jesus, I pray in your name that you'll help those that feel tempted to quit on their race, tempted to give up, tempted to drop the baton and not keep on moving forward. God, I pray that you will encourage us today. I pray according to Romans 8:11, the same Spirit that lives in Christ, that lives in us. So I pray, God, that we'd feel and know the power of the Spirit of God that lives in us. I pray according to 1 John 4, where it says that the greater is He that is in us than he that is in the world. God, I pray that we'll know there is a greater power from God, from the Most High, that's empowering us to run our race. God, I pray that we be encouraged to know, regardless of the season of life we're in, a teenager, a young adult, a single, a parent, Lord, an older person, God, that we would all know, God, that we have a race to run and you are empowering us to do it in your name. Let it be so. Let it be done. Amen and amen and amen. Come on, just give God praise. Give Him glory. Real quick. Yeah. So good. You can go ahead and be seated.